Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
We are rejoining MJ to continue our discussion from last week about General Hancock.
So he was a part of the Lincoln assassination conspiracy, hangings. Then he was involved in the Indian Wars out west. He was also involved in Reconstruction. He was one of the few Democrats that was given command of a military district. He was in charge of Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, I believe. Now, Hancock was friends with the Southerners before the war and even during the war, because I had discovered letters. There was a soldier in the Second Corps that had written to President Lincoln at the time saying that we're more afraid of our Commander Hancock's Southern sympathies than we are of the rebels. Just the way he talked about them and things. Right. So it's kind of like, okay, that's interesting. So during Reconstruction, he was very hands off. He says, you guys can run your, do business as usual. I'm not going to be involved, which a lot of the Southerners enjoyed.
Right.
Him and Oliver Otis Howard are going to clash. Howard at this time, he's involved in the Freedmen's Bureau. However, him and Howard are going to clash over treatment of Black Americans and, the frees. Slaves. And again, this is where he fought to keep the Union together. He could really care less.
Right.
I want people to understand, though, that's, all of these people are just a product of their time.
Right.
One of the biggest things I personally feel is you cannot look at these individuals of the 19th century with 21st century mindset, because it's completely different. It's how they grew up. You really can't view that. That's just my personal opinion. So he was very hands off. And he had replaced Sheridan, I believe, as the military district governor. Well, the folks in Washington didn't like that too much, of how he was very hands-off and letting them, the Southerners just do their thing. So he gets removed a few months later. Hancock is going to serve in the military all of his life. He has a lot of tragedy. Like we talked about, he had, the scandalous brother and scandal in the family.
Twin brother, even.
The twin brother. Also, too, he had entrusted a lot of his money to his brother when he went off to war, and much of that money disappeared. Also, too, through my research, I have found that he was giving a lot of money to Elmira's family. He was paying all these bills off. He co-signed a loan for his mother-in-law for $25,000.
Oh, that's a lot of money back then.
I mean, that's a lot of money now, but even back then.
I want to know what she was doing with $25,000 in the 1870s. And I haven't found out what she did with the money yet. Oh. But so I'm kind of seeing this pattern as his money is dwindling. He is going to suffer the loss of their daughter. She is going to die at the age of 18 in 1875. And speaking of cemeteries, Montgomery Cemetery in Norristown, Pennsylvania, where he's buried, as we can see on the graphic there, he designs that mausoleum. Yeah. When his daughter Ada dies at the age of 18. He originally wanted to build it from marble, however, did not have the money to do so. So originally it was built from sandstone. So at that point, he builds this mausoleum, which his wife was not happy about, because she does not want to be buried in Norristown.
She wants to go home.
She wants to go home and be in St. Louis. So then we have the start of that difference of viewpoint of where you want to be buried. So he designs the mausoleum. He picked out the spot in the cemetery for it. So he's predeceased by his daughter. Now, people are telling him, you're a war hero. Get involved in politics and run for president. Um, just through my research, it was just something that he kind of went along with. He's going to run for president in 1880. Oh, and there's his running mate, English. There we go.
There we go. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll be able to see I just switched out an image, and it's him and English together, their poster. I'm assuming, or at least one of their posters to say, vote for these two.
Yes. And it's funny because he was running for president, and his old friend Harry Heath. And that's one thing about Hancock. He told it like it was. So after the war, because he had been in business with Heath before the war, Heath survives the war, of course. He fought for the Confederacy. And he is having a discussion in Washington. And Heath says, well, he goes, I have a favor to ask of you. And Hancock says, I can't be doing any favors, as I'm running for president. And just because you're my good friend and former wingman doesn't mean that I'm going to do you any favors. And he says, oh, sir, he's like, don't you remember our dinner meeting years ago with your namesake, Winfield Scott? And he said, well, that was many years ago, Harry. What are you talking about? He said, he goes, if you're elected president, he goes, do you remember the dinner? What happened? And he said, and he's trying to remember it. And so basically he had this dinner years before with Winfield Scott, General Winfield Scott, when they were before the war, the Civil War. And Hancock loves potatoes, but he would mash them, which was an atrocity to Winfield Scott. Said, Hancock, how can you be mashing these potatoes? You're ruining them. And he's like, I like mashed potatoes, sir.
Best way to eat potatoes.
Best way to eat potatoes. So Heath says, later on, he says, well, sir, he goes, I just want to be the one that if you're elected president, I want to be the one that gets to mash your potatoes for you.
I love it.
And so Hancock's like, oh, Heath, you're a pain in my rear end, So, so he's going to end up losing this election, the closest in history, to James Garfield. And his wife wakes him up after all the votes are counted, and she says, I'm sorry, Winfield, but you didn't win. And he just said, okay. And then he goes and turns back around and goes back to sleep. So he really, he didn't mind losing, not being president. He offered his help to Garfield, if anything he needed, and he attends Garfield's inauguration. Also with my persona,
I was going to say,
because she was friends with Garfield too. So it's kind of funny how interwoven history is.
Oh my goodness, it is.
Yeah. He just goes back to being a soldier, and unfortunately, he also loses his son, Russell, in 1884. Now, his daughter, Ada, when she died in 1875, she died of illness. Russell is going to die of heart issues, and later is going to be found out diabetes runs along his whole paternal side of his family.
That's before they had a lot of treatment for that kind of
exactly
for that particular disease. Yeah.
And also the testing for diabetes back in that time was quite interesting.
Uh-huh.
One of the favorite ways to test for diabetes at that time is to taste urine.
Yep.
And if it was sweet, it means you were diabetic.
Yep.
Think about that, folks. Testing for diabetes has come a heck of a long way.
The fact that we could figure it out through your blood and not your urine,
yes,
I think a little better.
Absolutely. So basically, Hancock was diabetic and never really knew it. So he suffers the loss of his son. Again, now he's lost both of his children.
You have to think about too, sorry to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
That being diabetic, if he had been diabetic through the war, which he probably was, that would have affected that injury and how he was
absolutely
feeling.
Oh, yeah.
One of the symptoms with diabetes is that you are slow to heal with wounds.
Exactly.
And was a contributing factor.
Mm-hmm.
His hatred of doctors after being poked and prodded for, almost 2 months after he was wounded, he didn't like to go to doctors either.
Right.
So he is going to be involved in his last public duties in the summer of 1885 when President and former General Grant dies. Now, him and Grant really didn't get along too well. And there was actually, there's newspaper stories about it that Hancock had passed Grant in Washington and he saluted him and Grant didn't return his salute. So Hancock felt that he was disrespected.
Oh.
Well, when you get on Hancock's bad side, that's not a good thing. So he was tasked by the President of the United States to lead Grant's funeral processions in Albany, New York, and then New York City. Which
is what's happening in the image behind me, the drawn image behind me.
Yes, he's leading Grant's. That's one of his last public military duties in summer of 1885. There's some great accounts about that, and he gets a very wicked sunburn from leading these two things, because this is August of 1885.
Yeah.
In November of 1885, one of his last public appearances is going to be at the battlefield of Gettysburg. He's going to return, and he's going around the battlefield, and a gentleman who they consider the father historian of the battlefield at the time, John Batchelder, and he's going around the battlefield, and they're talking about the different placement of markers and things. So he comes across the placement of his wounding marker, which at the time it was not the current stone marker. It was just a wooden sign. Mm-hmm. And Hancock's looking, and he's looking around. And he said, "I was not wounded here." "Well, what do you mean you weren't wounded here?" He goes, "I do not remember, because if anybody's been to Gettysburg, where the current wounding marker is on Cemetery Ridge, there's a boulder there." And he says, "I do not remember a boulder." And Batchelder says, "Oh, Hancock, you were losing a lot of blood. You don't remember where we talked to people that were there and they said this is where it was." And he says, "Well," he goes, "no, this is not where it happened. I pretty much would remember." He goes, "I got hit in the upper right thigh, groin area." And I'm thinking to myself, a guy's probably going to remember when he gets hit there.
Because that's pretty close to some
important parts. So him and Batchelder kind of get into it on the Gettysburg battlefield about where he was wounded.
Wow. Hancock
says, and a couple of accounts corroborate this, he said it was so he's going to cross modern day Hancock Avenue, and it's further north. It's where the current 13th Vermont Infantry Monument is. Now, I actually read a lot of the accounts. I read his account. A couple of years ago, my friends and I actually walked that area and walked that line. We kind of followed that, and it matched up, after he said he ordered the Vermont soldiers to flank Kemper's oncoming brigade, and then he turned and he rode north toward. It matches up to what he says and the location. So I personally believe him. People can believe whatever they want to. I'm not trying to convince you of Hancock being right, Batchelder being wrong. So Hancock, then there was a couple letters back and forth after he left the field of Gettysburg in November of 1885. And he said, "Well, I've had enough of you, Batchelder. I'm going to place my own marker next year." So he had planned to come back to Gettysburg and place his own wounding marker where he said it happened. Unfortunately, he never gets that chance. He starts to not feel very well in January of 1886. And he doesn't want to go to the doctor. And, family and friends are telling him, "You're not looking too good, Winfield." And He finally goes to the doctor. So he ended up getting an infected carbuncle, a hair follicle on the back of his neck that basically what had happened is what we would call the infection went into his blood, and he is going to die on February the 9th, 1886, a few days shy of his 62nd birthday. Yeah. Pretty much from what we consider sepsis today.
Right.
So he never got the opportunity to come back here to Gettysburg.
It's interesting that, such a nasty wound occurred during the war. That didn't kill him. And then
Right.
an infected hair.
An infected hair. But again, it was, he didn't seek care soon enough. Plus, again, uh, it wouldn't heal properly
Right.
because of
If
his
he was diabetic.
diabetes.
Yep.
I did further research, and that's where I had found there's this whole paternal side because I did further research on the death of his son Russell, and it was heart and also diabetes. So there's this whole paternal side, unfortunately, of that. So that's where Hancock's story ends with his death in 1886. And, he lived a life of tragedy. So he's buried with his daughter Ada, the mausoleum there in Norristown, Pennsylvania. And some people have asked, well, why isn't Elmira buried with him? Well, she was very dead set against it. And I did some research, and kind of there was quite a few fights about this. I believe I would call them disagreements. She refused to be buried in Norristown. She wanted to be home in St. Louis, so that's why her and their son Russell are buried in St. Louis, and Hancock and his daughter rest eternally in Norristown, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So she refused to be buried in Norristown with him. So
I find it interesting after hearing you talk about them that she was willing to marry him at all. No, because she would have known at least when they got, I mean, maybe she didn't understand the whole military life and
Right.
you're going to be moving around all the time. But he would have made it very clear before he married her that he was a soldier, and probably a soldier first above everything else, it sounds like, because that had been his passion forever. And so you would think that she might have thought that out a little more. I don't know.
Well, she probably saw all the pomp and circumstance of
absolutely
before, and it's like, oh, this is what I want. I want to be
he's a good-looking soldier. He's an officer, and and I think personally she didn't realize what she was getting herself into.
Yeah.
And
I mean, even in a modern sense, being a soldier's wife is tough if they're
very
military.
tough. And then you're raising two kids with it too when you're out in some very desolate areas of California. Many times she was the only female, stationed out there with him. So she didn't have, she's missing, the socialite life, the friends, things like that. So I'm not exactly sure.
Raising children.
Yeah, I don't know. I think possibly she might have just thought differently about it. I really can't. Some of these people that we study, I wish we could get into their heads and just really to say,
them, okay, what were you thinking?
Just what were you thinking, or what did you expect? I think maybe she had different expectations about that. But that's why they're not buried together. She refused to be buried in Norristown, Pennsylvania.
I also find it interesting with so many casualties at Gettysburg on both sides that they chose to mark where he was wounded.
I think it was there's other sites along the battlefield of where certain people were wounded or killed. Like General Samuel Zook, he was killed in the wheat. Well, he was mortally wounded in the wheat field on day 2. He's got a marker there. But Hancock is a very big name when it comes to the Battle of Gettysburg. He's looked at as more of very heroic for what he did, leading from the front, calming the situation down. On he was engaged all 3 days, and well,
that makes sense then.
And even with such an injury, survived the whole battle.
Exactly.
It could have killed him.
Absolutely, it could have killed him, and. Because I also think about it, if it had just been, a couple centimeters over, it would have taken out an artery and that would have been it.
Yep.
So I think that it's interesting. Like I said, I go out on the field, and it's something I've talked about for quite a few years, of this possible other wounding site. And many people at first thought I was crazy. And they said, well, and they kind of sided. They said, well, he's losing a lot of blood. He might not have remembered where he was. Some people said, oh, well, maybe he did remember where he was. And then when I actually walked, in his footsteps, per se, And it was funny because I actually have a miniature of my friend who's a sculptor down here, Gary Castile. He does miniatures of the monument. So I actually have a miniature of the wounding marker. And a few years ago, when we walked the field, I actually put the marker where Hancock said he was wounded, and I did a photo op with it.
Aw.
But the good thing is, and that's why I always encourage people to research and be open to other information that's discovered or that's out there, because now a lot of battlefield guides, now they're saying, this does have some merit to it of where, so a lot of them will give tours now, or other historians are saying, well, this could possibly be different than where it's marked. So, everything on this battlefield is, some of the markers aren't in the exact locations.
Right.
Like the Armistead wounding marker is not in the exact location just due to accounts. He came over the stone wall with a few hundred of his Confederates. And there were 2 guns of Alonzo Cushing's battery that were down further towards the stone wall on Cemetery Ridge. So I think his wounding marker is probably about 50 feet further east than it should be. But again, and you're going off of memory too.
Right.
And people then, so I don't try to change people's minds. I'm just giving a different version of saying, this is where Hancock says he was wounded. I've actually walked the ground. I tend to believe him. And just think about it. So that's one thing I try not to do, is say, no, you need to listen to what I'm saying. I'm just saying, this is just a different version I want you to think about. So now when people
too, in Hancock's defense, since he had at that point had such an interest in geography and geology, like he said, I don't remember this boulder being here. It's something he would have paid attention to.
Absolutely.
And especially while he was leading his men, because he would have looked at the ground in the area to say, what can we use? What can we, to hide behind, to set up our defenses? And a large boulder would probably stand out in your mind as something that you would use as part of your fighting. So in his defense, I think because he paid attention to that kind of thing, I could also see why he would think, nope, this is not where it happened. I know for sure I was over here at the time that I received that shot. So I think that would have helped him remember it differently than how maybe some of the others that people talked to remembered it.
I just think that the current site as it's marked is just too further south, and it was too further south and west of, because it just, if you stand where his wounding marker is today, marked on the battlefield, and you look down, down the line towards the copse of trees and things, it's like, to me, he wouldn't have been in that location. But that's just me, my interpretation. I just invite people, if they're ever here at the battlefield, just to kind of think about it. Mm-hmm. Just say, so it's funny that I actually have people that have contacted me, or they come to town and they say, oh, well, where was it that he said it was? Because we want to check the location out. And people have actually gone to the 13th Vermont Infantry Monument, and they kind of just take a step back and they're like, yeah, I think maybe this is right. So, not trying to convince anybody differently, but that was one of his last public appearances, was here in Gettysburg in November of 1885.
Yeah.
So,
well, like you said, it's
sort of fitting, though.
When you receive that kind of wound, it's not something you're going to easily forget.
And like I said, I've been in the medical field for 20 years, and especially a guy's going to remember when he gets hit there. So, and I just let people believe they can make draw their own conclusions. Mm-hmm. And if they want to feel that that's where it's marked today is where it happened, great. If they think that maybe it is where he says it was, that's great too. Not trying to make anybody definitely say, you need to believe this. I don't. I'm just presenting the information and have them think about it. And I really hope.
I was going to say, maybe someday down the line, some other letter or piece of documentation will make an appearance that has not been known.
Absolutely. I always tell people, keep researching. Yep. And because especially now, records are discovered years later, they're digitized. I've come across a lot of things like letters of him and stuff like that on auction sites. Yep. The one about he was not speaking very well of the United States colored troops. That was on a random auction site I came across. And so always be out there looking, I also encourage people to be open, just because, maybe a book that was written in the 1950s about the American Civil War. There's been a lot more research at that
Yep.
time. And just, you know, read, research, and take it what works for you. As far as, yes, I read this book when it was published in 1960, but this newer research says something else. I really wish people would be more open to that. Some people are, and some people are definitely not. They
Yep.
just said, I read this in Coddington, and that's the way it is. So, but I hope people learned a little bit more about Hancock today.
No, I did.
You know, just about he was a regular person
Yep.
who suffered tragedy in his life. He is going to, you know, have issues with his twin brother. He's going to lose his money. He loses both of his children. And, you know, he wasn't always the hero. He had some bad days too on the battlefield, like at the Battle of Reams Station. You know, he did not perform well. He suffered with this wound that never healed. You know, he still had pain up until the day he died in it.
Yeah.
And
But you have to think about where it lodged. I mean, that
yes,
if you walk, that part of your leg gets used all the time. So
When he couldn't ride horses anymore, you said, and then
or not comfortably, yeah.
as
Not
a soldier
comfortably.
in that, he probably, you know, that probably was devastating as well. He has to be carted
absolutely.
around in an ambulance and a wagon. That must have been just so defeating for him.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I could
And
see where that would hurt his pride because he was
Yeah.
being the calming influence he was, but being in charge of things to have
Mhm.
somebody else cart him around
Right.
per se, rather than him just jumping on that horse and say, okay, let's go do this. I could see where that could not be fun for him.
absolutely.
And still not
Absolutely
any more
agree.
comfortable in my mind than being on the horse. Those carts are not comfortable to ride in.
No,
That would have
they
been
were not a
painful.
smooth ride back then.
No.
Okay. They were not.
He was in pain either way, I would
Yeah.
think.
He
Poor
was
man.
in pain either way. And but there was so much more to him. And like I said, you know, I have to laugh because, you know, we talk about him so many years later due to his war service, and he ran for president. But he was more concerned about if his trees were still going to be here 100 and some years later. And I've always wondered, I wonder, because I said, I wonder if, you know, was there ever a tree that he planted that's still around?
That
I was
would
going
be
to
so
ask
cool.
you.
No.
So what
You
about
know?
it was his in-laws' property, right? So does that still exist?
To my knowledge, it's not the same as it was. He didn't plant the trees there. He just took
He
care
burned
of
them.
the trees.
It'd be interesting though if the trees were still there.
That he took care
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
But yeah, so there was just so much more to him. He had
Yeah.
a great sense of humor, and you know, like I said, he was an artist, and he was really. I think he would be really intrigued with our modern day technology.
Oh my
I
goodness,
really do,
yes.
because he was one of the first officers. Like when he came here to Gettysburg, when he first came to Gettysburg to take over the field, he brought a portable telegraph with him. And he was really into communications. And I often wonder what he would think of our modern day, like smartphones.
Oh my goodness. Facebook.
Him
on Facebook? Oh my God, he'd be in jail all the time with his profanity. What are you talking about? You know, I'm like, but I think he would be very intrigued with our modern communication. I do.
Probably. Well,
Yes.
from a military standpoint, you could see him thinking, how could we use this to improve what we're doing?
Right. Absolutely. But yeah.
I mean,
And
he did go to West Point. Like you said, it was a school for engineers, and all of that falls in that.
Well, the funny thing is that one of my history mentor, and I seem to gravitate towards people who portray Hancock in living history for some reason. I become friends with them. I've known 3 individuals who portray Hancock, and one of them was my friend Randy, who was my history mentor. He died of cancer. It's going to be 5 years ago, but so he portrayed Hancock. And the funny thing is that at one of our meetings for our living history organization, he had all of his electronics out. He had his iPad and his iPhone, and then he had something else. And I just was laughing at him, and I'm like, I said, Hancock would probably be intrigued by all these gadgets. And he's like, oh, shut up, Major. But yeah, it's kind of weird that I seem to become friends with the people that portray him.
I don't think it's weird at all. It's because you're
Yeah.
supposed to continue his story, share his story.
Absolutely.
Yep. Just
After
like
my
Pauline.
mentor passed, that was one thing I wanted to make sure because he worked very hard to get Hancock's story out. And that's why, and I've always been a fan of Hancock, just in researching. I always found him to be intriguing of a person and a great soldier. So I've kind of picked up the torch to help get his history out. And I've made these discoveries and I've shared them on my social media. And, I am working on I'm always working on a book project, it seems, because I have one going on my persona, Pauline Cushman. I have one going on him. And then I'm also working on something with General Richard Garnett as well. So, but, yeah, so I kind of I said, well, his story still needs to be told.
Mhm.
And I appreciate the opportunity coming on here today with you guys again. I was
Because
very excited to come back on.
you are
And
so enjoyable because your history is so balanced and you know so much. It's not like you're somebody that comes in, just uses one source. You are using the primary sources. You are reading letters. And that's what's so fascinating because you have such a broad scope of information of these people that it's just you couldn't find it in one book, and that's
right.
why we love having you on here.
Oh, thank you. But I appreciate the opportunity, coming on to share his history because again, I try to bring a humanity about him.
Yes.
And that's why I hope folks that are joining us for this episode that they kind of maybe take away something they didn't know about him off the battlefield.
Yes. No, and I think that's the important thing. I think that's where people lose interest in history early on, is when we only talk about the great things they did or the one major thing that they may have been involved in, and we forget to look at all the things that made them the human that they were in the times that they lived. He was married, he had children, like you said, there were a lot of tragedies that hit that he had to deal with, and yet even with all of that, he would still go out and make these public appearances. And this was after the war. He went to these reunions. He obviously argued with people about where he was injured. All these little things that we don't consider, but that's even in our modern lives. Those are the things that make us us, are these little things. And so it's nice to put them back in his story so that we remember that he was a man doing a lot of things he loved, dealing with a lot of issues, and he just happened to be one of the better commanders in the Civil War, at least up through Gettysburg. Like you said, after Gettysburg he struggled a little bit, but he had some good reasons to struggle too, I think. So
yeah.
It was legit.
Yeah. And that's what's great about learning about these people, because these people aren't so far from us. The Civil War is really not that far away. Actually, I met a gentleman last couple weeks ago, and we got to talking Civil War history. And his great grandfather served with Hancock in the Second Corps.
Oh, wow.
How cool.
And he's going to go through his, because he has some letters from his great grandfather and stuff. And he's going to contact me if he finds anything for my research. So it's really, we're not really that far from it. And we're all the same. We're all human beings. We have our good days, our bad days. We have our tragedies. We have our triumphs. And that's why I want people to look at these individuals of history as just more than a name or more than a picture on the internet or in a book, more than a statistic. They were real people, real human beings, real feelings. And, with him, like I said, he wasn't always the heroic atmosphere. He had a lot of tragedy, and he had, unfortunately, he had a lot of scandal in his family too. Like I said, his nephew was arrested for murdering his love interest in the early 20th century.
Well, he was already gone by then. So, I mean, you can't account for your relatives.
Well, that's true. But because I was kind of like, and it was funny when I came upon it, and now see, he had two brothers, But I automatically knew which brother the father was because I said, I didn't even have to read it. And I said, this has got to be Hillary. Oh, yeah, it's Hillary's kid.
It's totally Hillary's kid.
Totally Hillary's kid. And I said, wow. But it's just, there's just so much of that. And I don't want to speculate, but I don't believe he had the fairy tale marriage where I think a lot of people think he did. I think there was a lot of, there was a lot of, no relationship is perfect by any means, of course, but I think just in reading about the difference of opinion in many things, where she was more of the socialite and about the attention and everything. And then as well as, where's all this money going? Why is he paying all of these bills? And
yeah, I find that interesting that he paid so much of his in-laws' bills.
But yeah, I mean, they pretty much by the time he died, there was no money. Unfortunately, and he started to live more frugally in his later years. So that's what, he's an interesting study, and I always love learning more about him and sharing it with people. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and connect with your listeners again, and hopefully they find that interesting. Things like this, it makes our history interesting, and that there was scandal, there was drama with these individuals. And they're much more than just a name or a
and not
picture.
necessarily the same drama that you've seen in the Hollywood version of the story. That's also something to keep in mind, because Hollywood writers especially, and no shame to them because they're trying to do their job of putting a story out there, but they will take liberties.
Well, and then also, as you mentioned, someone else that you had met whose great-grandfather was in the Civil War. I also hope this encourages our listeners to take the time, go back. Chances are, if your family's been in the States at least since the 1840s, chances are you probably did have someone who fought in the Civil War. Take the time to do a little research. There's so much online now that it probably won't be as daunting as a task as it was just 10, 15 years ago, and find out who your relatives were, where they served. How many were at Gettysburg? How many may have served with Hancock or maybe on the other side? Who knows? But
absolutely. Yeah. And I also, in a great resource is your local library. Because many of these libraries, you can use Ancestry in Fold 3 for free. So you can research your relatives and find out, because I think in finding out where we come from, it kind of, when I did my own genealogy, it kind of made me explain, and I'm like, oh, so I do come from a line of stronger women, or women that are outspoken and things. I'm like, okay, now I understand why I am the way I am. And on the flip side of that, I think that's why some people, when it comes to Civil War history, they're afraid about learning about the other side. I have friends that are, from the South. They had ancestors fight for the South. They're afraid to learn more about the northern side of it. And then there's the people on the northern side that are afraid of researching and fight, because I think they might find something that they connect with on a personal level and it's going to freak them out. And I had ancestors that fought on both sides.
Yep, me too.
And, and I actually had two that fought right here at Gettysburg on Culp's Hill for the Union. But to me, that's what being a balanced historian is about.
Exactly.
That I don't feel you can be an objective historian without knowing both sides.
Right.
And again, not everybody was fighting for slavery. Not everybody was fighting to free the slaves. Like Hancock, like I said, he could care less one way or the other.
There was many who didn't.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
And that's just me personally, how I am as a historian. I believe in balance, and that we can learn from all sides. We can learn.
Right.
Yeah, we can't push away the things that might make us uncomfortable. We have to learn about those too.
Absolutely.
Well, MJ, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Hancock. Folks, her social media handles and everything are going to be in the show notes, so definitely take a look. Because you have your pages dedicated to Cushman, you also have them dedicated to Hancock. So if you want to know even more than what she shared with us today, go check them out, and you're always updating them. And when you, like you said, anytime you find new information, new letters, new whatever, you share all of that with us. So it's a great way to keep learning. And I guarantee you're going to learn some things you never thought you knew, or when you have found stuff about other people that you occasionally share too that connect to Hancock or Cushman. So it's a great way to really kind of learn more about the Civil War and what was not just the major battles and the time period that it happened, but other things going on at that time and how it really affected our country and who was, what we were doing at the time as a nation. So definitely give MJ's pages a look and follow her you can do it on Facebook. You're on Instagram.
And I'm on TikTok now.
And you're on TikTok now too.
So. I'm on TikTok. So, and I also encourage people, if you're in the Norristown, Pennsylvania area, go check out Montgomery Cemetery. There's a lot of famous Civil War people that are buried there. General Hartranft is buried there. General Zook is buried there. A lot of Hancock's relatives, his parents are there. The scandalous brother is there. But yeah, check out the cemetery. And
I was looking at some of the other photos. I mean, we've shared a photo here of Hancock's mausoleum, but the cemetery itself is beautiful. Like there was a lot of other pictures I was seeing of the cemetery, the gates. It's a gorgeous cemetery to spend an afternoon in and get to know some of the people there.
The local historical society, they help upkeep his grave. They actually have the bullet that was pulled out of his leg in August of 1863. They have the bullet at Montgomery County Historical Society. And I donate twice a year to the Historical Society. I donate so that he has a holiday wreath and a Memorial Day wreath.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
Every year, because I want to make sure he has that. And he will have that as long as on my watch. So, but yeah, so definitely check out the cemetery. It's a nice cemetery, and there's a lot of history there as well. They do give, I think in the summertime they even do walking tours.
I think I read something about that.
But pay your respects to General Hancock.
He's got another nice marker at his gravesite too. That's in the ground that I didn't
a ground marker
here. Yeah. But yeah, it's a nice bronze marker that has more details about him as a person.
That was installed in 1976, I believe.
Yeah. And so there's that one that you can see.
So definitely, these people in our cemeteries, they had a life story, and, it's definitely worth getting to know them beyond the stone.
It really is.
Yeah, beyond the stone. Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, feel free to use it. You can just give
I
the
will.
credit to
I have so many quotes with you I should be stealing anyways. Or
But thank you again for having me on. And so feel free to check out my social media sites, as well as I appreciate all the support that I get from folks in doing this. I really appreciate it. And I do it to just help keep the history alive and to keep sharing their names and stories, because I don't believe a person truly dies as long as their name is spoken.
I agree.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCim. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.